You're watching the Real Football Network. I'm John Pollard, and this is Real Football Analytics. Today we want to talk about the St. Louis Rams, a team that certainly has improved over the last few weeks, buttressed by the gameplay of Todd Gurley. First, let's talk about St. Louis. This is Jeff Fisher's fourth year in St. Louis, and there's been a lot of discussion and thought around the league that Jeff is trying to mold this team into how he built the Tennessee Titans as a very successful and consistently winning franchise from 1999 to 2008. Those ideas inspired us here at Real Football to do some research and study the offensive, defensive, special teams, and efficiency reports for the Tennessee Titans under Jeff Fisher and the St. Louis Rams. Our research proved that really there's not a lot of comparison between the two teams, but perhaps we're about to see that. And the fact that Todd Gurley might be the last piece or one of the final key pieces for Jeff Fisher's vision to truly come to fruition in St. Louis. So let's talk about Todd Gurley. There's also been discussions about this amazing young running back and what type of player he reminds people of. We're going to do a comparative review of Todd Gurley's information and statistics over the last 4 years compared to two running backs that he's often likened to, and that is Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch. Let's go take a look at the numbers. So let's take a look at the 2012 season. Of course, when Todd Gurley was still at the University of Georgia, Marshawn Lynch with the Seattle Seahawks, Adrian Peterson with the Minnesota Vikings. I want to go over this entire profile that we look at here at Real Football when we assess running backs. There's certainly more metrics we like to reference, but these are, if I may, the meat and potatoes of the running back metrics we like to reference whenever we're evaluating or comparing running backs. First off, I want to point out the yards per carry and start to compare these players. Obviously Todd Gurley averaged 6.2 yards per carry, and that was a notch above Marshawn and just above Adrian Peterson, who had a great year. Of course, the 2012 season is when Adrian Peterson was challenging for 2,000 total yards that season. But Todd Gurley, of course, still in college, averaging 6.2 yards per carry. So in this case, in 2012, Todd Gurley looks more comparatively favorable when looked at against Adrian Peterson. Let's jump down to the quality rush percentage column. This is a metric that we absolutely reference consistently when we look at running backs. So a quality rush percentage in the mid-50 range for any running back with the workload that these running backs had in 2012 is really, really strong. So Todd Gurley, of course, had the best quality rush percentage amongst the three running backs that year. Adrian Peterson, again, had a great season, no question, one of the better running back seasons of all time in the NFL. He was just a notch below the 50% quality rush percentage. That's not alarming, but it does show more of an indication of comparative favorableness between Gurley and Lynch. Let's look at the yards after contact per carry. Okay, this is where I want to talk about how we start to use statistics and analytics to derive and differentiate between explosiveness in a running back and power in a running back. The yards after contact per carry, Todd Gurley and Adrian Peterson compare more favorably, with Gurley at 3.1 yards after contact per carry and Adrian Peterson at 3 yards after contact per carry. That indicates an explosive nature. After initial contact with the defender, the running back continues to make positive yardage. Now we know that Marshawn Lynch is a very powerful running back. He's running more typically or consistently in between the tackles where it's a lot busier with defenders. And so his yards after contact per carry would naturally be lower. But there are differences between explosiveness and power, and I'll continue to point that out as we look at other seasons when we compare these running backs. Let's jump down to the big runs. Now in this case, Gurley and Lynch compare favorably with the mid-40s to high 40s range. And of course, Adrian Peterson, this is where he's making up all his yards as he's striving for 2,000 yards. He had 64 runs of 10 plus yards, which is really incredible. And I want to also point out one other thing. We're going to look at the stuff percentage. In this case, Gurley and Lynch have a lower stuff percentage. This indicates that they're typically running more in between the tackles, right in between the tackles, and getting to the line of scrimmage quickly. The stuff percentage that you're seeing for Adrian Peterson at 23.8, let me explain a little bit of how we interpret that. First off, Adrian Peterson typically is he's an elusive runner as well as a powerful and explosive runner, but he can bounce around the backfield and look for open seams. And so as a result of trying to create opportunities, he may get tackled behind the line of scrimmage a few times. Just to keep him, in context, Barry Sanders had a career stuff percentage of over 20%, and we all know how good Barry Sanders was. But this just gives you an idea how we look at a metric, and then we can look comparatively between players and start to identify their style of gameplay. Let's move over to 2013. So now we're looking at 2013, and first off, I want to talk about the workload. Obviously, Gurley only had 165 carries compared to the workload with Lynch and Peterson. Remember, again, Gurley is still at the University of Georgia. I want to jump down to the yards per carry. With the less workload, he did have a higher yards per carry number at 6, where Lynch and Adrian Peterson were at 4.2 and 4.5, respectively. The quality rush percentage, again, a little higher for Todd Gurley in this case, but still in that same range with Lynch and Peterson in 2013. Yards after contact per carry, amazing synergy across all three running backs here, averaging around 2.2 to 2.4 yards after contact per carry. We didn't talk about this in 2012. We do want to touch on this topic, yards before contact per carry. That typically is indicative of a running style in terms of rushing game plan and scheme, and also quality of offensive line play. It isn't directly correlated, but those are all things that we look at as indicators. So Todd Gurley had a lot of space to generate some speed and power before he started to engage the defense, having that many yards before contact. So now we're jumping into 2015, and to explain why we didn't get into the 2014 season, obviously Todd Gurley had his last year at the University of Georgia cut short by injury, and Adrian Peterson was suspended. So we wanted to go to 2015 to start to look at the correlations between these running backs. First off, yards per carry. The workload's fairly similar. Obviously, Peterson has more carries, but Gurley and Lynch have similar workloads. Both Gurley and Lynch missed 2 games. And, Adrian Peterson, when he started the 2015 season, it's arguable that he was a little bit underutilized by the Minnesota Vikings offense. So we still think there's a good amount of information here to draw comparisons. Let's look at the yards per carry. Gurley averaging 6.1 yards per carry on the ground. Lynch down to 3.6 and Adrian Peterson at 4.5. Of course, we have 8 more games to go in the rest of the regular season, but that's an incredibly high indexed yards per carry for Todd Gurley. We'll see over the season with increased workload if he can keep that up. Of course, we'd expect it to come down a little bit, but that's still remarkable at this point in the season. On the TDs, obviously, they're all in the same general area. I think this is an interesting point. The quality rush percentage actually surprised me a bit. They're all consistently in the low to mid 40s. That could be indicative of a couple of things. First off, learning how to use these running backs with a couple of things. Todd Gurley, it's his first season. Do we run him in between the tackles, or we try to use his explosiveness on the outside? I think that's a bit of an experimentation that could be happening in St. Louis. For Marshawn Lynch, it's famously known that he's had challenges. The offensive line in Seattle's had challenges. A young offensive line, they haven't played together very long, and there's been challenges in pass protection. So this is Marshawn Lynch really working hard to make yardage while that offensive line continues to grow together and work better as a unit. Let's jump down to the stuff percentage. Again, a little bit indicative of what might be going on in terms of experimentation in St. Louis and how to use Todd Gurley. The challenges in the offensive line situation in Seattle, and then Adrian Peterson, kind of in the same area he's been since the last few years that we actually compared. So we have a high stuff percentage for all these players. I would expect those numbers to come down a little bit as the season goes on. Well, there you have it. A quick comparison between Marshawn Lynch, Adrian Peterson, and Todd Gurley. What kind of back is Todd Gurley? Who does he compare favorably to? Well, I think after looking at the last few years, we're seeing a running back that has a special combination of explosiveness, the comparison to Adrian Peterson, and power, the comparison to Marshawn Lynch. We truly have a hybrid player. And how about this for a little bit of fun? Perhaps a dash of Fred Jackson in there as well. Here's what it all means. Trouble for opposing defenses. And really, for Jeff Fisher and the St. Louis Rams, they may have the cornerstone piece that will put this franchise on a trajectory for successful seasons for years to come. For Real Football Analytics, I'm John Pollard.